it's the same that the Judeo-Christian values that Gentiles use it frequently. It means that they accept that there are a lot of similarities between, because Christianity actually was born from Judaism, and they see the similarity between the two religions. So how come that American Jews didn't see that the Gentile accepting the Jews as Jews because they shared values?
Well, this is a conversation that is very hard to have today because we don't have context. America was a different place 80 years ago.
Yeah.
In America, if you were not like everybody else, you were bad. Judaism, Christian, makes no difference. There was a way to be Christian. There was a way to be Jewish. And if you were not Christian in that way, there was something wrong with you. And people would tell it to you in the street. A man told me that his grandfather wore a beard, and someone walked up to him on a train, struck a match, and put his beard on fire in New York City. And he didn't call the cops. It was a different America. It was a very, very conservative America. It was a very, this is how you're supposed to be. America's changed. Now, the truth is someplace in the middle. We've gone to the opposite extreme where we're so, my friends say, we're so open-minded the brains are falling out of our heads, you know what I'm saying? But it's an evolution, it's a change. Go ahead.
Why does humanity encounter hardships in a spiritual world? So hardships meaning like things that happen in their life. Sometimes it could be very traumatic, sometimes it could be very difficult. How do you interpret that from a standpoint of, like, why do we encounter these things?
This young man over here asked me that question, and I dared answer him, and he told me I was wrong. So I already got that tonight.
But also, can you say that ego is attached to it? Because in a sense, how do you grapple with these things if you don't have ego?
You see, I want to explain to you my issue with your issue, but it's a bias. And I don't think it's my bias. I think it's the Rebbe's bias. I teach an adolescents. I teach teenagers. I teach young people. I teach him. He's already too old for me. He says, Rabbi, I can't talk to you no more. You became stupid. And adolescents are intellectuals. I had this whole idea. Adolescents discover their brain, and they obsess over it. And hopefully at a certain point in our lives, we realize that as important as our brain is, we're not our brain, we're our soul, which is a very different thing. But when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and you're smart, you see the mind and answers to questions, and like you said, making everything fit, making everything right, almost like a god. You're asking a question. It's a philosophical question that may or may not have a philosophical answer, that I may or may not have the answer to, that you may or may not agree or disagree with my answer. Those are 3 reasons for me not to answer you, you see. But the bigger question is, when my students ask me such a question, you know what I answer? Who cares? That's my answer. What difference does it make? And they get really upset. What do you mean? I gotta know. You really gotta know? Is it gonna solve anything? Is the issue understanding the universe? I don't mean this on a physical level. I mean this on a human level. Is the issue understanding, Einstein said, I want to know the mind of God. You can know the mind of God on the level of physics. Maybe you can know the mind of God on the level of chemistry. You cannot know the mind of God on the level of life, human life. It's too complicated. It's too sophisticated. You know what else? It's too personal. It's too painful. I feel. And when I say I feel, means I don't know. This is not my opinion. It's my tendency. It's my leaning. That anybody who would ask such a question of the Rebbe would get more or less the following answer. It's really not that important why. It's far more important what we do with it. It's far more important how we manage. I have an answer to your question. I have an opinion, I do. I have a philosophy about people and life and suffering. But the Rebbe that I know never afforded the people the luxury of focusing on that. You would never get away with the Rebbe and saying, Rebbe, my life is terrible. He would never he wouldn't let you say it, even if it was true. And believe me, he understood. My uncle was the Rebbe's secretary. He told me the Rebbe got on average 400 letters a day. 400 letters a day. He opened every piece of mail himself. Nobody helped him. He read every letter. And then he chose which ones to respond to. He didn't answer everybody, but he read every letter. Most of the letters that Rebbe received were not saying, Rebbe, I won the lottery, here's $100,000. Most of them said, I lost my job, my wife hates me, my kids are estranged. They were tzadis. The Rebbe listened to so much pain on a regular basis. But it couldn't break him, and he would not allow you, forgive me for using this word, the luxury of self-pity. He was so, and you have to understand, he was dealing with the Holocaust generation, who were far more justified in being victims than we are. He never allowed people to end with self-pity. He was very sensitive. He was very understanding. But always, okay, now where are we going? And I think in our generation, we have the luxury of feeling bad for ourselves. And it's a prison. It's a trap. I don't play golf, but I know that in golf they have sand traps. Self-pity is a sand trap. And first of all, it feels very good. Second of all, it's encouraged. It's not advantageous, it's not helpful. What do you mean, I'm not allowed to feel? You can do whatever you want. You can jump off a building. But do you want? Is that what you want? And the Rebbe was a person who told you what he believed. He told you his opinion. You think everybody walked out of the Rebbe's room and said, ooh, I love what he said? People were very angry with him. He told you what he believed, always. And if you didn't like what he believed, so you didn't like it, but he told you. And you're young. I mean, I don't think you're an adolescent, but you're young. But I think you're wise enough to appreciate how slippery a slope this approaches, because you want to live your life. Not wait for life to figure itself out and then to start living. Nobody's life is perfect. Everyone's got stuff. And everybody's got the choice of saying, my life is good, but, or my life is terrible, but. You want to be in the first group. You don't want to be in the second group. In other words, what I'm saying to you basically is, we'll ask that question when there's no suffering. We will answer that question when Moshiach comes. I want to share something with you. The Jewish people have a day called Tisha B'Av. It's the official day of mourning. And one of the, you're talking about complaints against the Orthodox world. In Israel, they have the Yom HaShoah, the day of the Holocaust remembrance. And it happens to be the end of Nisan, when you're not allowed to fast, when you're not allowed to be sad. It worked out because they made Yom HaShoah when the war ended. A lot of Jews, including Chabadniks, do not consider Yom HaShoah Yom HaShoah. We consider Tisha B'Av Yom HaShoah. We mourn for all tragedy on one day, the day that the temple was destroyed. So then it becomes very sensitive. The Holocaust not entitled to its own day and all these other things. And it becomes an argument that you can't win. So you just don't have it. You just leave it alone. In the very, very ultra Orthodox world, there have been rabbis who have written lamentations for the Holocaust. Wrote kinus, prayers to remember the Holocaust. The Kloisenberger Rebbe did, the Baba Rebbe, really right-wingers who have written new prayers to add to the list of tzaddis that we read on Tisha B'Av. There's a whole book of tragedies that we remember every year on the day that we fast, on the 9th of Av. The Rebbe didn't. And the Rebbe did not encourage people to say those prayers. Why? I'm sure there's many answers. My opinion. I feel, and that's the operative word, if I was 100% sure, I'd tell you my opinion is, my feeling is, The Rebbe felt the Jews cannot focus on the Holocaust as long as there's one living survivor. One living survivor. Because they can't look back. They have to look forward. Jews go back post facto and remember. But if we had spent the last 70 years remembering, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here. Many of us wouldn't have been born. The secret of Jewish survival is optimism and forwardism, looking forward. Your question is well taken. But the question is not what the answer is. The question is where the focus should be. Is that an answer? Or is that political incorrectness? Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. What's your name, young man?
My name is David Warner.
Hi, David. I'm Joseph.
Nice.
Do you listen to me like the rabbi next to you?
He introduced me to your...
Very good. I love anybody who loves me. That's funny. I don't know why. I'm a funny guy. Go ahead.
Your class trending, top trending class. He said it to everyone.
Oh, thank you. I do appreciate it. Please, Inside Chassidus, yeah. This is my life. I teach. Go ahead.
So my question is that the Rebbe talks many times about tzedakah.
Right.
And he's encouraging people and pushing people. And the Alter Rebbe tells us we give 20%, more than 20%. And it seems to be this push and push and push. I've personally seen many miracles through tzedakah. Huge miracles. Did the Rebbe ever tell anybody to pull back, ever? I always hear pushing forward. Did he ever, are you aware of the Rebbe ever saying anything in the opposite direction? If someone was being in trouble.
Here's the problem. At heart, I'm a philosopher. You know what that means? A professional equivocator. Give you an answer, it says to you whatever you wanted to hear. So here comes a piece of philosophy, okay? There is a rule in Judaism. It's really a rule in Judaism, not just in Jewish philosophy and theology, but Jewish law. That there is no rule without exceptions, period. But there's an exception to that rule too. And that's idolatry. Short of idolatry, there's no rule that doesn't have an exception. You got to keep Shabbos to save a life, you break Shabbos. You have to keep kosher to save a life, you eat non-kosher, and so on. So the answer to your question is, of course. Of course. I knew a man. I knew him personally. I knew him casually. Who he was a very successful man, and he was a tzaddik ayid, and he gave tzedakah. He went into the Rebbe's room with his wife, and his wife complained. And in Yechidus, the Rebbe said to this man, "Give me your checkbook." And he handed the Rebbe his checkbook, and he handed it to his wife. And he said to him in front of her, "If you want to give tzedakah, you'll ask your wife." True story. So here's the rule. The Rebbe always pushes us in a direction we're the least likely to go. Most people's problem is not that they give too much tzedakah. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? You understand my drift? But the Rebbe the Rebbe was never the kind of man who had one piece of advice for everybody. He wouldn't have been a Rebbe, he would have been a fool. It was very individuated, and people heard what they needed to hear. People knew. And the Rebbe told people, I'd give you the best example for this. People complain to the Rebbe that they can't make a living. And the Rebbe would write to them that you have to believe in God and trust that we work and He provides. I would say 9 out of 10 letters go in that direction. But then there's the other letter where the Rebbe writes, God wants to feed you, but if you're not going to work, you're not going to make a living. So each person heard what they were not naturally disposed towards. And that's what the Rebbe does in every situation. That's the answer to your question. I'm afraid of you. Not like her, but I'm afraid of you too. What's your name again?
Rod.
Rod. Go ahead.
The question is this, it piggybacks the question of that young woman.
Malka.
Imagine a world, imagine a universe with no suffering. No suffering at all. The question is whether man would need God.
That's my answer. That's my official answer.
And man invented God, but God exists.
Okay, may I respond? First of all, there's a lot of, listen, I talked to you before. So a little bit I got you figured out. There's a supposition here, first of all. There's an opinion. Second of all, there's a very big difference between a perfect universe and perfect living beings. I understand that science sees it as a continuum. Physics, chemistry, biology. I don't. Maybe there's the microorganisms, but when you reach levels of intelligence, even amongst animals, and certainly amongst people, there is, to quote quantum physics, a quantum separation. And to see the exactness in the universe as a simile, as a philosophical basis for exactness amongst human beings, is a leap of faith. It's a simplism. I think it's a little bit simplifying, in my view. Physics can be orderly. We believe in a soul. We don't believe that organisms are simply an arrangement of physical components with electricity to create chemical bonds that become more complicated to create living beings that procreate and reason. A human being is a piece of God. It's a whole nother being. It's the same universe, but it's a very different level. And
Isn't the universe
so
a piece of God?
yeah, but it's a simpler piece. It's much easier for it to be orderly. As massive as the universe is, it's not a continuum. There's a lot of significant breaks in the evolution from physical to chemical to biological to human. And for a human being to figure himself out, and that's the problem with us. We were cursed with the blessing of free will. And to achieve perfection in ourselves is so much more complicated than it is in the world. It's reasonable. It's entirely reasonable that in the perfect universe, creatures as sophisticated and as deep and as spiritual as us should struggle with peace, with perfection. But let me move on. Let me move on to the answer to your question. If there was a universe where human beings were perfect, there are only a few possibilities. One is we would be robots. We would really not be human. We really would not have choices. There is no phenomena of choice without the right to make a mistake. Can't be. So there could be a perfect universe. I'm not sure I want to live in it. That's option one. The other option, this is what I tell my teenage kids. What would happen if everybody in the world had everything? Health and wealth. What would happen if nobody was lacking for anything? So, it would be such a wonderful world. I'll tell you what would happen. There would be so much jealousy. There would be so much jealousy. We'd be eating up each other alive. I tell my teenage students, because they don't argue with me, so I can afford to tell them this. I promise you, the day human beings figure out how to do the right thing without necessity, you work because you need money. You didn't work, you sit on the couch and become fat. Only little kids don't sit still. The day human beings are self-motivated to be righteous without an extraneous motivation, I give you my word, there's no suffering in the universe. The suffering in the universe is the source of all the kindness. The suffering in the universe is the source of all the empathy. The sensitivity of the universe is the source of all the complexity of what makes us human. You take those things away, we will be animals. And we're very sophisticated, so we will out-animal any animal. So wait, what I'm trying to tell you is, the degree to which you and I disagree is beyond your fathoming.
No, actually, you probably agree more so than you.
So then I object to this idea that the quote perfect universe should amount to perfect human beings. I just have an issue with it.
If the whole universe is perfect,
And that's a big if. It's an if.
it's an if, and humans are part of the universe, therefore, through simple logic, humans are perfect.
See, but this is where you and I disagree. We went in a circle just now.
It's a big step. It's a wrong logic altogether.
And I would make another statement. Human beings are in the universe. They're not a part of it. We're in the universe. My father, so live and be well, is a very interesting man. I've never met a more individual thinker than my father. Born and bred and brainwashed in Chabad. But he's really, he thinks for himself. And he always tells me, every human being is a representation of God in the world. Exactly. It's from outside the universe, in the universe. And it's complicated. It's terribly self-serving to say, it's kind of difficult to be God. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of difficult to be God. We make mistakes. Go ahead.
You gave us a bracha of having, being able to have peace with yourself.
Yes,
Being that it's the most important.
it is.
What would be one of the steps to achieve that?
Oh, good question, good question.
He's a Talmud of Achei. I told him the question. I put it in his head. He said, I said earlier, that the first layer of peace is peace with oneself. So he asks, are there steps to getting towards that?
Acceptance.
That's the answer right there. Okay, I'm going to tell you a few things, okay? Listen, you learned in Achei, right? So what's the 4-letter word? You're supposed to know the answer to this. You make me look stupid. W-O-R-K. Thanks for the translation there. Couldn't have done it without you.
You say work, but work. What?
A person's got to work. Now, you're not working to become perfect. You're perfect. You're working to not die. Literally. Human beings have to work hard, not to make money. It's fundamental to being human. In the framework of work, you are acute. Your senses work, your mind works, your heart works. Everything about you is sharper and crisper and better when you're busier. Everything about you is diminished when you're stagnant, when you're lazy, when, forgive me for saying blasphemy, when you're American. This priority is not going to make you happy. It's going to make you busy. That busyness is going to get you more in touch with yourself. Now, getting more in touch with yourself can actually make your life harder, because the smarter you are, the more you understand how many things can go wrong, and the more things you have to worry about. And the more you can drive yourself mad. So you'll say, I'll take drugs, I'll be mellow, and everything will be good. You see, the way it works is, a person is always a work in progress. And he needs to forgive himself for his inexactitude. A person has to accept himself. Nechama mentioned gratitude. The greatest bracha a person can have is love his life. The greatest curse a person can have is to wish they had a different life. And it's an attitude. It's an attitude. You know, there's a great story that they tell. It's one of the Gewaltige Meises. It's a wonderful metaphor where there's this king who wants to be happy. And he calls all of his wise men and women. They come, they sit around, and they, whatever they do. And he says, I need a trick to happiness. So they tell him, you have to find the happiest man in the land and put on his shirt, and you'll be happy. So his officers go out and they look for the happiest man in the kingdom. The poor guy is sleeping on a bench in a park, and they wake him up and they disrupt him and they schlep him to the palace. He doesn't even know what's going on. He's afraid out of his mind. And he comes into the king, and Your Majesty, I'm so sorry. He's half naked. You understand? He smells that he's dirty. He goes, And the king said, everything's good. I just want to borrow your shirt. Because the wise people in the kingdom told me that if I'll put on your shirt, I will be happy. And the happiest man in the kingdom said, Your Majesty, I would give you everything I have. But I don't own a shirt. I don't own a shirt. That's the formula. Don't only work because you have to. Work because you're alive. And magic will happen, I promise you. Magic will happen. People who are hardworking are successful. I don't think you have to work like me, like I'm a sugar nut, but a person has to be busy. And a person has to like himself. And to like himself, you have to accept the life the Abishta gave you. Like I said before, it's not complicated. It's hard to do. But it's not so complicated. You sort of, emunah, b'tochen, I believe in God. And I believe that what God has given me is good for me. That's enough. You can't feel that way if you waste your time. It's impossible. It's depressing. So that's the answer. Be busy and slowly but surely mean it when you say, Baruch Hashem. Mean it. Thank God. It's a shtickle answer. I mean, you're asking a very important question. It's a shtickle answer.
Is the soul of someone you lose comes back while you're still alive?
In a body?
Yes.
In another body?
Yes.
The official and actual answer to that question is, I have no idea. I think a soul is a dynamic thing. It's a complicated thing.
It's a neshama, right?
A neshama, yes. And there's two ideas that are confused, that are intertwined here, that are coming together. The physicist will talk about the idea that all of material is information. There is a soul, which is an essence of life, and then there's a consciousness, there's awareness. They're not necessarily the same. In other words, a person lives and dies. That person's life is an accumulation of millions of actions and experiences over the course of many, many, many years. That becomes an entity unto itself. And for the purposes of this conversation, let's call it a consciousness. That soul may come back into this world in another body and have a new consciousness. That old consciousness continues to be. That old consciousness may even continue to be aware of its relatives in this world. That old consciousness may actually be impressed upon, may be changed, enhanced by the life we live. It doesn't necessarily bind the soul. This whole question of Gilgul Neshama, of reincarnation, is the way I'm listening to. It's a bit. There's different opinions in Kabbalah about it. It's very complicated. But the opinion that we follow, I'm sorry for my opinion, holds that reincarnation of souls doesn't mean the soul comes back. It means the soul has a baby, like parents have children. A soul dies. Soul was in a body, it passes away. If that soul comes back, what it really means is a spark of that soul becomes a new soul. It comes back into the world. It's much more complicated than we understand it. But to answer your question directly, it's possible for a soul that lived and died to come back into this world. But the new soul is a new consciousness. And the previous life is a living entity unto itself that doesn't go away ever. In other words, every time a soul lives and dies, it's another soul. It splits apart, like parents having children. Genetically, they come from their parents, but they're new beings. Souls are similar in this way. That's how we understand the mysticism. Again, there's different opinions in Kabbalah, but this is how the Arizal understands it. Lurian Kabbalah, as we call it. So it's possible for the soul to come back, but the old soul is still the old soul. It has its own awareness, its own truth, its own existence, and it's forever.
So that will not come back.
First of all, it's still alive. It's still alive. It's not in a body, but it's still alive. It lives. It's alive. It's a living being. It's a real thing. We believe in the resurrection, Achei Temimim, and then it comes back. That consciousness, that awareness comes back into a body.
Rabbi, I want to tell you a story, a personal story. I was on a flight with my sister from New York to Israel, but we had a stop in Amsterdam for about 6 hours. And I told my sister, you know what? Let's go and see Anna Frank's house. And we were walking on the street, and I remember that very vividly. And I saw a house with stairs, very wide stairs, and I could have swear that I have been in this house. I was there. I never been in Amsterdam. I am from the Middle East, and no connection to Europe at all. And I didn't know what's this feeling, and I was telling my sister, you know what? I swear I was here. And I never could explain it.
My mother-in-law has a book in her house that people are reading. It's a pretty new book where a woman did research about people who have recollections of the Holocaust. People who are alive today who have vivid recollections. In other words, there's apparently an idea that people can literally remember their previous lives. I don't know the name of the book, but it's a popular book.
I Origin?
Huh?
It's called I Origin?
I don't think so. If you'll tell me the right name, I will remember it.
No, that's not it. It's not I Origins. It's a novel.
No. It's a book with anecdotes, with actual stories of people who have these memories of an earlier life, specifically from the Holocaust. So it's certainly possible. Certainly, what it means, I don't know, but it's certainly possible.
Did you go into the building? And once in the building...
Did you recognize the furniture? Go ahead, what's your name?
My name is Viola, but my super name is Tila.
Okay.
If husband and wife are part of one soul, then how do you explain divorce and finding another soulmate and another formation of like... What? I don't...
What do you think I'm going to tell you as the answer to your question? Take a wild guess. I'll give you a hint. I said it already. Who cares? We've got to live. It's really the most important answer. It's really the most important answer. But the answer, having said that, souls have personality. Souls have character. But souls are very sensitive. They're very fine. Life isn't so sensitive. Life isn't so fine. By the time, assuming a boy and a girl who have the same soul actually meet, they're both bringing to the union a lot that's not a part of what makes them one soul. Couples who make their marriage work get past a lot of difference, and they find a way to love each other so deeply, not because they agree about everything, not because they share all interests and all values, but because their union is more important than the other things, and they figure out how to navigate it. They figure out how to put it in a place. But it's hard to figure out. It takes a lot of time. And a young couple that gets married is likely to hurt each other as they go towards that goal. And sometimes the pain is so much that they can't repair it anymore. Many, many couples who were married and divorced, married other people, regret the divorce. Because the second person they married wasn't better. But they learned on their first spouse, and they wish they could live in another universe and not abandon that relationship because ultimately it was better. But there's so much pain in growing up. Even a person by himself without a spouse. Now, the point of the pain is not to suffer. The point of the pain is to figure itself out. I have this analogy in my head, okay? So I'm going to say it, okay? All night, this movie is playing on my head. There's an animal that's called an elephant. You ever heard of elephants? There's a halacha, it says in the Gemara, it says in Shulchan Aruch, that when you see an elephant, you're supposed to say a blessing that Hashem has made strange creatures. Mishana habriyot. You say it when you see a great ape, and you say it when you see an elephant. Now, some people believe that you say it when you see an elephant because it's so large. I believe, personally, and this is just my opinion, that you say it because elephants are so unbelievably intelligent and unbelievably sensitive and therefore unbelievably sophisticated. Watch a film of a baby elephant playing with its trunk. A trunk is an incredibly massive organ. It can knock down a tree, but it's so sensitive. It takes an elephant a long time to learn how to manage it. A shrew doesn't have that problem. A shrew plops out of the womb and dashes off to find food, that's it. Because an elephant is so sophisticated, there's such a huge learning curve. Human beings are infinitely more complicated than elephants. We have to learn so much about ourselves simply to learn how to be people. To bond with another person of the opposite gender, you're very different fundamentally, involves so much learning, so much trial and error, so many mistakes. I teach him, and I always tell the kids, who are you most likely to hurt in the world? Who are you most likely to hurt in the world? And the correct answer to that question is the person closest to you, which is your wife or your husband, but you also love them the most. So you have to learn how to be married. And depending on many, many factors, it can become too hard to learn. And that's when divorce happens. But upbringing is very important. The health that you bring into your marriage contributes enormously to your ability to navigate the learning that a marriage involves. People who bring more scars into their marriage have so much more to deal with in learning how to be married. The goal of every human being is to stay married, to fall in love, to, over the course of your life, to become so connected to your spouse that you literally cannot remember having not been together. Couples who've successfully figured marriage out, they love each other so unbelievably, you can't even imagine. It's worth it. That's how much they love each other. But it's hard. And not everybody can do it. It doesn't always work. You need a willing partner. If one or the other doesn't want to work, it can't work. It's the answer to your question. But you should understand something. The Rebbe would not tell you what I just said. The Rebbe would say, marriage is a great idea. Get married. It's the best thing that'll ever happen to you. You'll figure it out. Because he believes in the institution and he believes in people's ability to grow so much that he doesn't want to frighten you. Doesn't want to frighten you. But I think I gave you a pretty honest answer. I frightened the crap out of you. If facial expressions are any indication. Anyway, if you haven't noticed, I'm married. No complaints. Baruch Hashem.
I have a question.
At your own risk.
Imagine Hashem comes to you and he grants you an answer to any one question.
Oh my God. What question would I ask him?
I'm being serious.
Oh, I would answer him, why are you coming to me? Go to somebody else. If I can't have all the answers, I don't want one. I want to ask you a question. You think that God is like a super guy in the sky?
No,
So how could you ask that question?
because I was 8 years old when I asked that question.
When you asked the question, or what God offered an answer to you?
I just asked him.
I understand.
The answer came to me.
But what is the answer?
My question was different. My question, at 8, I was afraid of death.
Wow.
There was no death in the family at the time. My concept was if God came to me and granted me one wish, what would I wish for? And I said immortality. It took me about 10 seconds. Immortality. And you know something? We all have immortality. And you know that proverb phrase, be careful for what you wish for, because you may get it. If we have immortality, we're coming back each time to suffer. So to me, the two big questions I'm interested in is, why is there suffering in a perfect universe? Because that's what science thinks as of the moment. And the second question is, what is the singularity? Now, the amazing thing, the amazing thing about the Jews, we believe in a single God. And I thought that was nothing special until recently, very recently, I was watching a documentary, thinking that believing in a single God is the equivalent in believing in the singularity, which exploded to create the universe.
Sure, you have a question also, right?
Yeah.
What's your question? No, he's going to continue soon. I want to hear.
You mentioned that a neshama coming back down is a neshama having a baby.
It's like a neshama having a baby, right?
So how do you explain the idea that they come back into this world to fulfill the potential that previously has?
I'm going to answer you, but let's not waste time with this, okay? Because this is who cares. According to Kabbalah, there is a fixed purpose. There's a certain number of souls who have to do a certain number of things, and when all that is completed, the purpose of the creation is realized. That's how Kabbalah holds. Okay, the numbers and the particulars are recorded, but it doesn't matter. The point is, it's finite. So if there's a certain number of souls that need to do a certain number of things, if a soul doesn't complete what it needs to do, a spark is broken up from the parent soul.
Should we be achieving that?
Jewish souls, right?
That's an interesting question, and the answer could be quite complicated. So the official answer to your question is, I don't know. So I'm answering you. The child's soul is a separate being, but it's here to complete the mission of the parent soul, but not as the parent, as the child. So there's a duality here. There is a finite mission that needs to get completed. If father doesn't do it, son does it. So in a way, the son is connected to the father because together they're completing a certain mission. But on the other hand, once that son is created, that daughter is created, they're their own identity with their own consciousness. And they have their own Achei Temimim, their own resurrection.
I have a question. I have a question.
I'm afraid of the rabbi here.
No.
I thought, when your time is up, it's when your purpose, the soul's purpose has been completed. It's not an accident. So I'm just trying to reconcile that with something you just said. I don't know if that's...
What do you think I'm going to tell you?
You don't care.
Who cares? But it's the truth. Who cares? In other words, the point is we got to live our life.
Yeah.
We're not calculators. It's my need. This is my go-to answer. You have to understand. You're an adult. I talk to kids. This is all that kids do. Why? And how come? And what's the point? So my job is to take them out of that towards really personal responsibility. I think the answer to your question is not necessarily. Free will means we could mess it up. That's what it means. We could do the right thing, we could do more than the right thing, but we are not electrons in a continuum playing out our part of something much bigger. We're real. God made us to be as we experience ourselves. And there's meaning and truth in that. And just like we understand very consciously we can make good choices and bad choices, it's not just our experience. On very deep spiritual levels, that's actually the truth. So I don't think we have to be busy with worrying. Is like a rocking chair my grandmother has on her. Keeps you busy and doesn't get you anywhere. I love that. Worrying is like a rocking chair. We have to live our life and make good choices and be wise and be humble and thank God and do good. Did I answer you or did I play politics with you? Rabbi, thank you for asking the question. I'm afraid of his question.
A few questions floating in my head. I'm trying to form them while I speak. There's a big social media influencer and saying that things are getting bad. It's really bad in America now. Resembling what Jews in Europe were experienced before Holocaust. So Jews in America really should get ready, move to Israel. What are your thoughts?
Wow. Don't say you don't know.
The official answer is Simon Jacobson speaks about this. Okay, I have opinions about this. But I just want to make the point that this is my opinion. I feel this way very strongly. And I feel this way because of the Rebbe's influence on my life. But I don't know. I believe this. First of all, the rabbi said something before, which is so fundamentally true. It bothers me to no end how many people think that the sign of intelligence is to be negative and frighten people. It's such a widely held cultural belief. And it's so stupid. It's so rotten. It's so self-destructive. The only pleasure you get from frightening other people is seeing that they're afraid. Otherwise, your life's terrible. Why would you choose to live this way? And it's so culturally normal. You have to understand, I was raised by the Rebbe. The Rebbe had, Kalman has the book, Positivity Bias. I was raised by a man who always said, if you have a choice, look at the cup as half full or half empty, look at it as half full. I belong to the opposite world of those social media pundits. I belong to the world that's always going to err on the side of the world is better rather than worse, as opposed to the alternative. Now, but there was a Holocaust. And how could you not be afraid? Now, I'm going to say something very, very disturbing. But again, this is what I believe. Holocausts don't just happen. There's another component. You've been around Chabad, right? So you know that we talk about Moshiach all day long. The Rebbe talks about Moshiach all day long. The Rebbe believes that we're at the end of the ride. And I believe him. You don't have to. I believe him. Now, the world is very confusing, and people are particularly confusing. But the diet of negativity and pessimism and fear that is being fed to us I'm going to use is evil. It's not only wrong, it's evil. And the people feeding it to us, who consider themselves intelligent, to call them cowards is not enough of an insult. They're megalomaniacs. They need so much to have an influence on people's lives, they're prepared to ruin them with fear. It's so foolish. Do bad things happen? Of course. Will bad things happen? Of course. You want to live that way? And you're almost being told that if you don't live that way, you're unintelligent. There's something wrong with your intellect. And to me, that's really the essence of religion. What is the difference between religion and religion? Now I know that I'm going to have to hear all the crap about Christianity being about hell and heaven. I don't even believe Christianity is that. But Judaism certainly isn't that. If you are a religious person, you live in God's world. And if you live in God's world, you live in a good world. If you're godless, you live in a world of random. This is the very essence of religion. Not just that God exists, but that God's in charge. He's a pretty good guy. He's hard to figure out. It's not our job to figure out, it's our job to live and to trust Him. This is my thinking, this is my philosophy, this is what I teach my own children. And reality pummels us with fear. It's almost never justified. It's almost never justified. I see no reason in the world that you and I are living in today to give it merit. The world is not that bad. It's just not.
And what about the Jews in France? You know, the Arab population is like increasing and Jews are cornered or ghettoed or endangered or threatened.
Have you ever met the French Jew? You live in France or you live here? You live in France or you live here? You're disqualified. My son is in yeshiva in France right now. You ask French Jews, they will be insulted by the question.
My cousins, or many cousins, live in France too. And
I want to tell you something. What's your first name? Your first name? Huh?
Shalom.
Bracha. Do you know Jewish history?
I'm learning.
Do you know how much Jews have suffered?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you understand that for most of our history, suffering was normal? My father told me, he came from Russia after the Holocaust, and they were in displaced persons camps. And they came to Paris, 1947, and a French boy threw a rock at his head. And my father said to me, that was normal. That was expected. He wasn't upset. That's how they treat us 2 years after the Holocaust. So I'm asking you, do we live in that world? What I'm saying to you, in other words, is, this is just my opinion. I'm not God, I'm not the Rebbe. I would like to believe that I allow the Rebbe to govern my thinking. But of course I could be wrong. The Jews have never had it so good. In France. The Jews have never had it so good. In England. It's not the way it's supposed to be. And what's going to happen tomorrow, nobody knows. And let's be honest, for the first time in 2,000 years, we have a place to go. To correlate the world we're living in to our history is not to understand our history. In my opinion. In my opinion. Just my opinion. But I'm not going to change it so easy, except if you pick on me, then I'm all bets are off.
No, I agree with you. On personal level and on national level, it's the same thing. You don't run away from difficulties. You challenge them.
Right.
And that's what I teach my patients.
You're a psychotherapist? What's so funny? I don't know why that's so funny. Of psychotherapy. Psychiatrist or
No, not psychiatrist.
Okay, Ashikoyach. If I may give you a bracha, you should find a way of giving all of your patients a positive look on life.
I did.
It's hard, because they have to take it. That's why they're your patients. That's why they're your patients.
Well, when they come to a therapist, it means that they are ready to accept.
Halavai. Okay. So we agree on one thing, huh? Go ahead.
I got a book for my birthday on Emunah, And in the first few pages, it says almost everything that happens to you, even the minutest things, are directed by Hashem.
Okay.
But what about if we mess up our lives with our freedom of choice?
Yeah.
Don't we have freedom of choice?
We do.
So I don't understand.
Yeah, very hard to understand. It really is very hard to understand. The simple answer to the question, it's not the complete answer, because I have a rule that anybody asking questions about free will, I say, I'm not going to answer your question, I'm going to send you my Article 13. I have a book that's never been published. I have 25 pages on free will. You want it, I'll send it to you. I mean it. But I'm not going to talk about it because free will is a circle. The minute you start, you're on a merry-go-round that never ends. It's the nature of the discussion and the nature of human ego and whatever else doesn't allow the conversation to go from point A to point B. So I'll be happy to send you the article. I'm not engaging with you. I'm just going to tell you one thing. You have to live every moment of your life as it is in the present. And whether it's your fault or God's fault, this is my life right now, and God has put me here. It's of course it's difficult. But you know what's more difficult? Not to do that. Because you can't live. It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. It's especially difficult if you feel like a person hurt you. If God hurts you, you can deal with another person because the feeling of inadequacy and lack of fairness. But you see, if you don't let go, they still are hurting you. It's a funny thing. It's a funny thing. Not easy. It's a funny, funny, funny thing. If someone hurt you deeply, you don't want to let go because the world has to be fair. The universe has to be fair. It ain't. I tell my children fairness ends in nursery, if you're lucky. Fairness is a lie. And it's been made into a politique. It's been made into a philosophy. And it's dangerous because it's just not true. You cannot make the world fair. You have to make the world just. And just is not the same thing as fair. Everybody has what they have. We all live what the Rebbe gives us.
But it's Rabbi Akiva or Hillel HaZaken that said, "Habchira chopshit ve'areshut netuna." It means it's up to the personality or the intellect of the person to make choices.
Yeah. But if you made bad choice,
We have the set of mind.
if we made poor choices and now we find ourselves in this situation, our belief is God put me here. And no, it's the truth. It's the truth. How do you reconcile the fact that my poor choices brought me to this space and the fact that God put me in this space? So philosophically, I'm not answering the question. I'll send you the article. Practically, the answer is because I have to live my life now. And that's all that matters. It's all that matters, is the now.
I have a question I want to ask the Rabbi. Simple question. The Rebbe, we all know that a primary element of the Rebbe's focus was on bringing Moshiach. And today we mark 30 years.
Since Gimel Thomas.
Since Gimel Thomas. So how do we keep the Rebbe's mission relevant, and how do we each make sure that it comes to fruition?
Yeah. What's the dirtiest four-letter word in the English language?
Work.
That's 90% of it. And the other 10% is attitude. I mean, how can I answer that question, man? I have a different question. That doesn't bother them.
Asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend.
You know the story? A chassid did a big aveda. He did something really, really bad. But he was embarrassed to tell the Rebbe. So he came to the Rebbe and said, there's a guy in my town who did something terrible, but he's very, very embarrassed. So he sent me to ask the question for him. So the Rebbe takes a look at him and says, so why did he send you? He could have come himself and said that you did the aveda. Can we afford to ask that question, Mayor?
The question is, can we afford not to ask the question?
Really?
I don't don't know, that's how I feel.
That's what I said right away.
What?
I said that right away, as you were saying.
We afford not to ask the question. When something is so pivotal, it's so important, so the question is, we have an obligation to keep it alive.
Right. But not to ask questions.
No, my question is not a question on it. The question is how, in other words, my question is that what is the mechanism to make sure that we bring this to fruition collectively, not just be comfortable?
Meir, we have to be real Jews. You and me. We have to grow in our Yiddishkeit, in our Torah, and in our Avodah, and in Gmos Chasadim. And we have to teach our children that there's no finished products. There's no graduate Chassidim. Every Lubavitcher Chassid has to look every day in the mirror and say, how can I be more a Yid? Not just in the Shlichus, Meir. In our own personal lives. We have to learn Torah. We have to learn Chassidus. We have to daven. That's the fortification. We have to take yeshiva with us. And not say, I did it. You don't like my answer?
No, I appreciate your answer.
It's the truth. It's the truth. It's our Achilles heel. It's our Achilles heel. Medaf ton mit sich. Medaf ton mit sich. Jede Shliach. Medaf ton mit sich allein. Medaf allein davenen, medaf allein lernen, medaf allein wachsen. I think he wants me to change the subject. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask a naive question, but is it realistic to expect that all the energy that's being used to help bring all Jews could also be navigated towards other Jewish leaders outside of Chabad, so that these efforts could exponentialize? Because as leaders, you have a ripple effect, right? More so than just other Jewish people. And there are other prominent Jewish leaders outside of Chabad. I don't know how realistic it is to try this outreach towards them.
Well, first of all, every Jewish leader has a responsibility to lead.
But the Chabad culture.
Chabad culture is going to take a very long time to become mainstreamed. You don't understand how radical it is, because you're in Chabad.
Right.
It's unbelievably radical. In 500 years from today, it'll be realistic for Chabad values to be mainstream. It's so crazy. It's so untraditional. The traditional Jew is closer to the girl, the boy who doesn't want to serve. You have no idea how radical Chabad is. It's so not the way Haredi Jews behave. It's going to be a long, long time before that becomes the normal. I'm not going to answer your question, but I will say this. Not all souls are created equal. In other words, on some level, leaders are created. But on a fundamental level, leaders are born. And when God is ready, He'll plant those souls. Maybe He has. But trust me, you'll hear about it. It's not going to be a secret. You follow what I'm saying? Go ahead. What's your name?
Maddie. It's a bracha.
Esther Bracha. Go ahead.
I have a question.
You know, the rabbi told me that by 10:30 there's not going to be a person in the house. Just for the record. Go ahead.
We're a convert.
AM.
We're a convert. Is it, I've heard different things of what, you're a ger from the time you're born to the time you go, because wherever you were at any point in your life, you're a stranger. So you're born into a family that you're a stranger to. And then, you come to your place in life where you are drawn to it, and then again, even to Chassidus later on, like your Hasidic birthday. What is the best way to handle your previous life? You know, I've heard people say, and I know converts who said, you gotta just get rid of, you just gotta cut your ties, you gotta move forward, you've gotta kind of leave that behind in order for you to express your soul the way it's really meant to be in the world. Is that a practical thing to do?
You mean relationships?
Yes, relationships with your family and your brothers and your sisters, and you know, there's a lot of angst in that when you choose to become Jewish from a family that's not. You know?
I don't think that Rebbe would agree with that at all. Period. There's a famous rabbi in Israel, his name is Rabbi Gafni. He's a true scholar, a holy Jew. He's a convert from Australia, of all places. And the Rebbe gave him very specific instructions about how to maintain his relationship with his family. He was told to visit with a certain regularity and to show enormous respect for his parents and his siblings, and to appreciate that he's the one who made the change. It's on him to include them in his world and for him to be included in their world, rather than to blame them for not understanding. You're asking a real question. And the problem with real questions is they never have simple answers. Life's hard, in the best case scenario. But to make changes in the middle of life is extraordinarily difficult. It's extraordinarily difficult. The most important thing for you to do is live your life meaningfully and positively. And as easy as it is for me to say, not walking around all day long feeling disrespected, even if it's true. Everything else has to come second. So the answer to your question has to be, the more manageable your life is, the more you include your relationships in it. As your life, what happens to people in general, unless they mess it up, young people are very energetic and they're very ambitious, but they don't really have a life yet. At a certain point, especially if you have a successful marriage, you have a life. And the life becomes predictable and peaceful and constant. The healthier and the more peaceful your life is, the more you can afford to go back and include more and more in that world. What you cannot do is destroy yourself because of these relationships. And it wouldn't make a difference if you were a convert or you were BBB, born, bred, brainwashed. Nobody can put other people before themselves. It doesn't help them, it doesn't help the other people. In other words, let's say you grew up in a home and there was conflict, didn't get along with, whatever, your parents, your siblings. Judaism does not ever allow us to throw people away. But Judaism doesn't allow us to throw ourselves away either. So you have to come first. Your spouse has to come second. Your family has to come third. And absolutely, the bigger you become, the healthier you become, the more you want to include people in your life. They're your life. Now, I understand that halacha has a very black and white approach to this. But halacha is one dimension of Judaism. And again, I know for a fact that this is not the way that Rebbe feels. So there may be other people who have different opinions, but I think that that's the Rebbe's approach. But do put yourself first. It's very. Don't feel like, even though the truth is, there is an automatic guilt. You changed. You went away. And you do have a certain responsibility because of that. But you got to take care of you. I think that's an answer.
Are you open to use the word acceptance?
Yes.
Sure.
It's acceptance.
Of yourself.
Acceptance of yourself, of others too. It's two-way. It's acceptance and gratitude.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Really, if I'm not saying it emphatically enough, you're absolutely right. I agree completely. Yeah. I'm not halfway. You're right. But it's hard. The point is, it's not so easy. It should be, but it isn't.
She's young.
Go ahead. What's your name?
Shoshana,
Go ahead.
how do you address a Jew who says to you, "Oh, those rituals are stupid"? I mean, they use those very They don't just say, "I disagree." They'll put them down and say it's stupid, it's ridiculous. I'm talking to another Jewish person.
Right.
When they say that, it hurts me.
Of course. It would hurt me
I feel
too.
very hurt.
Right.
Personally, I'm not Orthodox, but it still hurts me like it's a stab in my heart. And I don't know how to answer them then.
You asked them a very simple question. Have you ever tried them? Have you ever tried them? Whatever the things that she's calling ridiculous. Yeah.
You know, that's very interesting, Rabbi, because someone I know, actually did try one thing, and they were very moved by it. The same person that puts everything else down.
Surprise, surprise.
So the way to do it is, so do I say to them, well, look, you did this, and look at how, now it's become part of them.
Why don't you just say, until you try, you're not entitled to an opinion.
I'm going to write that down. I like that.
And before you meet that person, you call the Rebbetzin for some moral support. And after, you call the Rebbetzin again for some more moral support.
Until you try, you don't have...
You're not entitled to an opinion.
Don't knock it unless you try it.
I like that. I never thought of that.
You know why you never thought of it? Because it's personal to you. If it was personal to me, you would have given me that advice.
No, but I could see it in action. It was just a simple thing like lighting Shabbos candles. It made the biggest difference.
Of course
and
it
it
did.
occurred to me to say that, look what a difference that made. So why can't you try something else? And you're saying...
No, but don't argue. Don't say that. Just say.
What?
Don't say that. Just say, until you try, you're not entitled to an opinion.
Okay, I like it.
Don't engage.
That was really...
Because she'll wear you down. She'll just make you feel bad. Okay, Baruch Hashem, I'm happy. Okay, one more question.
I enjoy studying Tanakh, the role of a Navi, and I know that Nevuah prophecy ended 2,500 years ago. I always wondered what it was like to be with Eliyahu or Elisha. I always wondered, and I was, like as a kid, I don't use the word jealous, but people who lived to see that must have been incredible. But as I got exposed to Chabad and I began studying the Rebbe, I began to realize that he is enough.
It's like being around Elisha, yeah.
So, right. So why was this generation so blessed to have someone who's so out of the ordinary? We've been blessed always.
Right, correct.
And I'm not sure. It seems, though, even a little out of the
You think 6 million Jews dying is not enough of a justification?
to get that from. Well, maybe that's the answer.
Man, it's expensive. The Rebbe is unusual. There's no doubt about it. But he's expensive. He's expensive. But I want to tell you something. I want to answer your question, okay? I want to tell you something anyway. When prophecy was prevalent, it was very widespread. The Gemara says, the Talmud says, there are 55 prophets who we know by name. 48 men and 7 women. The Gemara also says there was 1.2 million prophets over the course of 1,000 years. That means every year there were 12,000 new prophets. Every month, 1,000 new prophets. In other words, prophecy was as widespread as people getting smicha. it's I think, important to appreciate the world. And it'll give you a sense of history in terms of Kabbalah and Chassidus and the pushback against it. During the first 1,000 years of our existence, the center of Jewish life was spirituality. Now, spirituality or prophecy, the way it's described in Halacha, has very, very precise criteria. And these criteria are brought in Rambam, they're brought in law, based on the Talmud. And they include some very, very critical absolutes. A prophet is not a crazy person. A crazy person is a crazy person, period. Prophets were very healthy people. You have to read the Rambam. In the Shemona Parakim, there's so many, Rambam talks about prophecy so many times, it's almost like he feels like he has an obligation. To read the Rambam's introduction to Pirkei Avos, for example, or introduction to Mishnah, or the Ma'amar Nevuchim, the guide to the flex, the entire second half, like from chapter 30 till the end, is entirely explaining the philosophy and the evolution and the reality of prophecy. Prophets had to be physically whole and healthy, intellectually curious, open, schooled, but with principle. And there was a purity about their lives. There was a solitude about their lives that were all prerequisites to what we call the manifestation, the experiencing of the Shekhinah. And when you study prophecy in Judaism, and it's very different from Islam, for example, the idea that the prophet had to be a very, very whole and healthy human being before comes out at you. And you appreciate that the only way to explain the prevalence of prophets during the time of the First Temple is that, as nuts as the Tanakh describes that era to be, there was a lot of normalcy in Israel. There were a lot of very healthy people who didn't just spend their time killing each other, that lived in a sufficiently peaceful and wholesome environment with the right kind of teachers and the right kind of support to achieve the human wholeness that's a prerequisite to prophecy. Suffering, the destruction of the temple, created a space where there isn't the kind of support that can allow the typical person to have the kind of wholeness and perfection to even make it possible to become prophets. So the way we understand it is, prophecy didn't end. It became extraordinarily rare. Because for a person today to be tough enough, to be as whole and healthy and as deep and as principled as a prophet needs to be, without the support that our world would provide, makes it very rare. And that's how you understand a personality like a Rebbe. So then, it wasn't only more prevalent because God wanted it. It was more prevalent because the world supported it. And now there is very little support. We're all wounded. You know that? The Gemara says that for hundreds of years, so first of all, let me just conclude this conversation. When prophecy ended, the rabbis made a deliberate decision to recenter Judaism away from spirituality towards Talmudic scholarship. In the time of the Second Temple, the temple itself was secondary to the school of learning. They made everything scholarship and intellectual and interpretation and law. When mysticism reemerged, and then it evolved into Chassidus, the pushback was, we went away from that. We went towards a Judaism which is anchored in being an intellectual and a scholar, not a spiritualist. And our answer is, and this is written in the Zohar, that as we approach Moshiach, we go back to that, and we taste it. And that after Moshiach comes, we're going to go full circle. And we're going to, again, live in a world which is sufficiently supportive of people, to a people achieve the kind of health and wholeness which would make it possible at least to have the prerequisites for the Shekhinah, for God, for the manifestation of holiness on more people, on people who are not as great and as tough as a Rebbe. You follow? Okay, it was really a pleasure.
Thank you very much.